Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into the lush, incense-thick world of the Mughal court, one hairstyle at a time. You'll want to picture yourself padding barefoot across cool marble floors, the sun dipping low beyond a lattice window, and your scalp tingling. Why? Because you're about to learn how elite grooming in early modern India involved not just ambition and artistry, but also a truly shocking amount of hair oil. And trust me, you probably wouldn't survive this routine without slipping straight off your own embroidered cushion. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from somewhere with monsoons, deserts, or just a plain old pillow, post your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing who's dozing off where. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into the courtyard just as the sky burns orange behind a lace of domes. Peacocks are complaining somewhere out of view, and the air smells like rosewater, sandalwood, and a suspicious hint of cooked onions from the kitchen wing. The moment you arrive, a eunuch raises an eyebrow at your windswept mess of hair and gestures toward a basin. You are clearly overdue for your daily champi, the massage and hair oiling ritual that every noble, from scribe to sultan, swore by. Your hair, my friend, is about to become a canvas. A small, wiry barber named Shafi appears from a shaded alcove, his hands already slick with almond oil, warmed by the morning sun. He speaks in slow, conspiratorial tones while working the oil deep into your scalp, knuckles rolling in firm little circles. You must soften the roots, he says with a grin, or your enemies will think you are stubborn. You try to nod, but regret it. There's now half a fist of oil sloshing across your forehead. See, in the Mughal court, hair was never just hair. It was read like a horoscope, like poetry. If it gleamed under lamplight, you were refined. If it smelled faintly of jasmine and vetiver, even better. The emperors themselves, especially Shah Jahan and Akbar, were known for their glossy, heavily perfumed locks, tended to by teams of expert hair attendants. Akbar, despite his endless military campaigns and governance experiments, made time each morning for head oiling. Priorities. And this wasn't just about shine. Oiling was said to cool the brain, promote clear thinking, and, some swore, encourage righteous dreams. There's even a travel diary where a Portuguese envoy complains that Mughal officials spent more time grooming than governing. Fair. You settle in, blinking at the midday glare, as Shafi starts muttering about gooseberry paste. He's describing the precise schedule, oiling on odd days, washing on even, and trimming only when the moon is waxing. Historians still argue whether these routines were grounded more in Ayurvedic science or in courtly superstition. Either way, your scalp is tingling like a sleepy volcano. The barbers use combs carved from sandalwood and buffalo horn. Shafi shows you both. One smells nice, the other feels like it could pick a lock. He uses the horn one, of course. As your hair gets sectioned into neat, oiled bands, Shafi points to a tiny copper pot. Camphor paste, he says, to cool your thoughts before bed. You decline politely. You're already hovering on the edge of a nap. A boy approaches with a golden tray of mirrors. Not one mirror, 5. One each for front, back, sides, and the elusive top-down view. You catch a glimpse of your reflection and almost don't recognize yourself. Slick, gleaming, slightly shellacked. Welcome to Mughal nobility. Nearby, another courtier is having his beard curled into stiff little corkscrews using heated tongs. For symmetry, says Shafi, rolling his eyes. You glance down at your own chin. Nope, not ready for that kind of commitment. In this world, hair wasn't hidden away or casually thrown up in a bun. It was curated. The lines of a parting mattered. The balance between oil and fragrance that could sway someone's opinion of you before you even opened your mouth. This was, in a way, social armor. And for all the talk of aesthetics, there's an undercurrent of politics. A certain style might align you with Persian fashion, another with Deccan trends. There's a rumor that Jahangir once dismissed an entire envoy because their top knots looked exhausted. Hair, here, is diplomacy in disguise. You get up, slightly dizzy from all the oil, and maybe the gentle neck cracking. But Shafi isn't done. He produces a tiny vial from his sash. Musk oil, he whispers, a drop behind each ear. For dreams. You nod, mostly because you're not sure what else to do. As the sun leans westward, you feel strangely regal. Your scalp hums. A breeze picks up, carrying the scent of rose attar from a distant garden. Somewhere in the palace, a lute begins to pluck a sleepy melody, and a eunuch yawns dramatically. It's a good first day in the Mughal court. Tomorrow, Shafi says, you'll learn how to wrap a turban without crushing the entire architectural miracle now sitting on your head. Good luck with that. You wake the next morning to the faint rustle of silk and the soft, deliberate clack of a servant carrying a mirror tray across the mosaic floor. The air still holds a trace of last night's vetiver and camphor, and your scalp, though still slightly slippery, feels oddly refreshed. But there's no time to linger. Today you're being summoned to the zenana, the women's quarters, where hairstyle is not just fashion. It's geometry, it's symbolism, it's frankly a minefield of unwritten rules. A handmaiden named Layla meets you at the threshold, where a screen of sandalwood slats filters the morning sun into golden stripes. She says nothing, just gives your hair one very judgmental look and waves you inside. You follow her barefoot across smooth tiles into the heart of the women's palace. The zenana hums with muted laughter, the glug of rose water being poured, the wet slap of hair being combed through. It smells like cinnamon and old secrets. A trio of noble women sit near a window, hair parted down the center with surgical precision. Their locks are being braided slowly, methodically, by maids kneeling behind them, each pair working in near silence except for the gentle rhythm of their fingers. The parting line is everything, not just neat, but meaningful. One woman explains, while peeling pistachios with deliberate grace, that the central parting represents balance, devotion, and respect for tradition. Slightly off-center, that's playful, maybe even a little rebellious. Too far to the side, scandalous. You glance up, suddenly paranoid about your own part. Layla notices and smirks. The Mughal elite treated hair symmetry the way modern engineers treat bridges, with mathematical seriousness. There were rulers for measuring the angles of partings, even charcoal dust for outlining precise lines before a comb ever touched the scalp. Historians still argue whether these rituals had spiritual origins or were simply fashion amplified by wealth and time. Either way, it's mesmerizing to watch. And speaking of mesmerizing, the fan-bearers here are not just waving away the heat. They are also subtly preserving the hairstyles from any rogue breeze that might frizz a curl or bend a braid. The peacock feather fans aren't just pretty, they're tactical defense. Suddenly, a young girl runs by with jasmine blossoms tangled in her hair, chased by a nursemaid brandishing a comb. Layla tuts. Always flowers, never patience, she says. You wonder if that's her poetic way of describing youth, or just a dig at the child's flyaways. One of the older women, her braid wrapped into a coiled halo, invites you to sit and have your part examined. You must align your mind before you align your hair, she murmurs, and places a hand on your crown as if checking your spiritual Wi-Fi. You hold still while a tiny silver comb is drawn slowly down your scalp, bisecting it like a sacred river. A dab of rose attar is pressed at the point where the part begins, then traced down the path in a near-religious ceremony. This, it turns out, is a good part. You feel vaguely blessed. It wasn't always this serene, though. One older lady recounts a parting rivalry between two courtiers that escalated into a passive-aggressive poetry war, each stanza more pointed than the last. Hair wars, she sighs, were always the most elegant. While you sip a tiny cup of saffron milk, Layla tells you about the Mughal obsession with proportions. The width of the part could suggest modesty or vanity. Narrow partings implied discipline and restraint. Wider ones, well, those belong to the more flamboyant personalities. There's even a folk tale about a woman whose part was so wide, a parrot once mistook it for a perch. You're not sure whether to laugh or nod reverently. And then comes the daily ritual of fan-assisted setting. After the parting and initial braiding, a handmaiden waves a heavy fan across the finished hair, coaxing it to settle with subtle humidity and gentle warmth. It's like a sleepover with thermodynamics. One woman explains that Mughal women often scented their hairlines with a mixture of sandalwood paste and vetiver oil, not just to smell nice, but to keep the mind cool. You can't help but notice how cool everyone seems, despite the heat, the layers of fabric, and the politics pulsing just beneath the surface. You spend the next hour simply watching the way fingers move like calligraphy pens through hair, how the strands are treated with the reverence of silk. A courtier leans over to whisper a secret to her maid, but the maid is busy untangling a knot with the focus of a sculptor. Hair here isn't just personal, it's public currency. Some women, you learn, maintain slightly frizzed textures on purpose, believing it gives the illusion of spiritual frenzy. Others keep theirs so sleek it reflects candlelight. And then there's Layla, whose own hair, wrapped into a double coil and fastened with a lapis comb, probably violates some law of physics. Before you leave, they show you a box of parting combs, each with a distinct scent: rosewood, neem, camphor. Some even contain hidden compartments for a smudge of kohl or a pinch of saffron. It's a little absurd. It's also brilliant. The older woman gives you a farewell gift, a folded silk handkerchief soaked lightly in mogra-scented oil. For parting practice, she says with a smile. You nod, unsure if she means hair or life. As you leave the zenana, the sun casts a long line of light across the marble floor, catching your new parting like a line drawn in gold. And tomorrow? Tomorrow comes the real test. Turban time. You rise to the faint sound of drums, those soft morning thumps that echo across the courtyards like the Mughal version of a wake-up alarm. But today is no ordinary day. Today you're being fitted with a turban. Not just any turban, mind you, but one styled to sit perfectly above a freshly oiled and geometrically parted head of hair. This is the Mughal equivalent of threading a needle with a melon. You're escorted to the men's dressing pavilion, where cushions are plump, mirrors are tilted just so, and several exhausted-looking assistants are busy untangling silk. It smells like sandalwood, dried limes, and something you can only describe as dignified sweat. Waiting for you is a master turban folder named Bashir, a man whose mustache points confidently east and west. He eyes you like a tailor evaluating unruly fabric. So, he says, already circling you, we must wrap without collapse. That's when you realize this isn't just about making the turban look good. It's about not destroying the intricate braid architecture beneath it. You sit very still as Bashir begins layering the base wrap. The cloth is fine muslin, long enough to mummify a camel, and dyed in rich hues of saffron and indigo. He moves like a dancer, looping it over your head, tucking, folding, adjusting. You catch a glimpse in the mirror and nearly gasp, because it's beautiful, yes, but also because your braid is still alive under there. Miraculous. Hair beneath turbans wasn't just ignored or shoved away in haste. Mughals paid careful attention to how hair interacted with headwear. Some kept hidden braids, others coiled hair into tiny buns at the crown. Akbar himself was known to have preferred a specific knot just beneath the left temple, rumored to symbolize wisdom, though historians still argue whether it was just more comfortable that way. And then there were the air vents. Yes, air vents, small loops left loose in the turban fold to allow breezes in and to preserve styled hair from steaming into oblivion. You now understand why Mughal nobles looked so composed. They engineered their comfort. Bashir adjusts a pleat near your temple and pauses. Too tight, he mutters. You'll sweat out your thoughts. He rewraps it. And this time you feel regal. You also feel about 5 inches taller, partly from pride, partly from the sheer volume of fabric stacked on your head. You hear another attendant whisper about the emperor's turban diplomacy. Apparently, gifting a length of turban cloth was a supreme honor. Receiving one and failing to wear it correctly? Political suicide. You suddenly sit a little straighter. And then Bashir adds a final touch, a jeweled pin shaped like a lotus. You blink. It's heavy. Balance is everything, he says. One bad tilt and people assume you're unstable. You're not sure whether he's talking about posture or politics. Maybe both. Over in the corner, a younger noble is struggling with his own wrap. His braid, woven with silk ribbon, keeps peeking out, refusing to be tamed. An elder scolds him gently. Your turban is your halo, he says. Your hair is the prayer beneath it. It's poetic. It's mildly terrifying. Some wore their turbans intentionally loose, letting a lock of hair slip out near the brow. Romantic, they said. Others kept it sealed tight, not a strand in sight, a sign of discipline. Women sometimes wore scaled-down turbans with their saris, particularly during ceremonies, and court artists often painted them with a flourish of visible braids poking from beneath. You sit through a final inspection, Bashir tilting your chin this way and that. He uses a feather to check airflow beneath the folds. Good, he says at last. You will not faint. And just in time, too, because a courtier bursts in to announce an audience with a visiting scholar. You rise, adjust your posture, and pray silently to every follicle on your head. As you walk through the garden, the weight of the turban presses down, but your braid underneath stays smooth, serene, almost smug. You pass by guards, scribes, even a monkey lounging on a windowsill, and not a soul questions your coif. Success. Still, you wonder, how did they keep this up during war or monsoon season? One guard explains that in battle, warriors sometimes tied their hair into protective knots under tightly bound cotton wraps, minimizing sweat and distraction. Hair shows who you are, he says, but it shouldn't block your sword. Of course, not everyone got it right. One tale tells of a noble whose overly ornate turban collapsed during a formal bow to the emperor. The room reportedly stayed silent for a full 2 minutes. He was later reassigned to an embassy in the mountains. Coincidence? As you return to your quarters, the turban still miraculously intact, Bashir gives a parting nod. Next time, he says, you learn how to style your beard without setting your turban on fire. You smile politely. He's joking. Hopefully. You're woken not by drums today, but by the rhythmic splash of water being poured into brass basins. Outside, the sun hasn't yet cracked the horizon, but in the women's quarters the world is already abuzz with the quiet chaos of grooming hour. You're headed into the domain of oils now, tonics, pomades, balms, and brews. The Mughal court didn't just wear hair, they cultivated it. Layla greets you with a sleepy smile and a bowl of warm almond milk. She leads you to a low marble platform where a young woman is seated, her hair cascading like a velvet curtain over the side of a bronze chair. Two maids are working through it with slow, synchronized movements, each wielding a shell comb and a bowl of scented oil. The scent hits you instantly: rose, clove, a little bit of myrrh, and something deeply herbal that smells like thyme itself. It's not just perfume. This is math. This is medicine. You're about to witness the Mughal philosophy of scalp care. A woman named Farzana, who introduces herself as a Telchi, a master of oils, waves you forward and dips a tiny spoon into a paste the color of dark honey. She dabs it on your palm. It's warm, slightly gritty, and smells like roasted fennel. Fenugreek and amla, she explains, for thickness and dreams. That's the thing, every oil had a purpose. Coconut oil cooled the scalp. Mustard oil kept lice at bay. Jasmine-infused sesame oil for clarity of mind. Historians still argue whether the recipes were primarily Ayurvedic or imported via Persian influence. But one thing's clear: your scalp is now slick enough to blind a court painter. The massages aren't just relaxing, they are structured rituals. Pressure is applied in slow spirals, as if mapping the solar system on your skull. You feel your thoughts melt like ghee on a warm plate. They even use the backs of silver spoons to apply cool compresses across the temples. One woman swears by crushed lotus root and sandalwood paste to prevent overly aggressive dreams. Another recommends sleeping with a braid soaked in almond oil wrapped in silk. You are mentally filing away all of these as part of your emergency sleep protocol. Then comes the vinegar rinse, diluted with rose water and strained through silk. It's poured in a slow, reverent stream, while a poem is recited about the moon being jealous of a woman's shine. You're not entirely sure if you believe that, but your scalp is tingling with delight. You begin to notice the hierarchy of oil users. Elder women tend toward vetiver and camphor, cooling oils. The younger set prefers jasmine and cardamom. There's even a rumor that the Empress herself uses a secret blend containing ground pearls. You try not to roll your eyes. A court physician arrives mid-session, carrying what looks like a spice rack from a very fancy apothecary. He explains how certain oils were believed to influence mood, digestion, and even loyalty. A blend with crushed cloves might reduce headaches and inspire poetic thought. Too much nutmeg, though. You might forget your own name, he says cheerfully. You lean subtly away from the nutmeg. The oil is worked through your scalp and along the length of your braid with such patience it feels like a prayer. And it wasn't just women who oiled their hair this meticulously. Men at court had their own blends. Some preferred stronger spices, even a touch of tobacco extract. Akbar was said to favor a mix of saffron and musk, though historians disagree on whether he actually applied it himself or had a team of oil bearers. There were even oil competitions, quiet, passive-aggressive games in which courtiers tried to outshine each other in gloss and fragrance. One courtier was famously dismissed for over-oiling, to the point that his turban slid clean off during an official address. "Too much ambition," someone whispered. Another layer to this ritual: the moon cycle. Yes, the lunar calendar determined hair oiling intensity. The full moon called for heavier, more fragrant oils to nourish the thoughts. The new moon demanded restraint, lighter oils, more introspection. You wonder if the court astrologers had charts for this, but Layla simply shrugs. The moon tugs on hair, just like the tides. You watch as a mother oils her daughter's hair, then twines it into a careful knot. It's not just grooming, it's memory, passed down in fingertips. Before you go, they let you smell a legendary blend kept in a sandalwood box. It contains saffron, blue lotus, powdered rose quartz, and a few ingredients no one will name aloud. Layla lifts the lid and waves it gently under your nose. "Only for coronations and heartbreak," she whispers. You nod solemnly, though it smells like a spice merchant fell in love with a florist. Your hair now gleams like polished obsidian, and your scalp hums with sleepy gratitude. A light breeze teases your braid, and for a moment you swear you hear it sigh. The sky above the harem garden has taken on that gentle amber hue, the kind that softens everything it touches, pillars, vines, even the stone lions that guard the fountain like they're just here for the ambiance. You're following the sound of snipping. Not the snipping of scissors exactly, but of something lighter. Razors, maybe? Threads? As you round a carved archway, you arrive at a shaded terrace, and suddenly you're somewhere between a salon and a sacred ritual. Today you're observing the fine art of Mughal hairline grooming. Yes, hairlines. Because in this court, where a strand out of place could trigger a poem or a scandal, the forehead was a canvas, and the edge of your hair mattered deeply. You settle beside an elderly woman hunched over a girl's brow, holding what appears to be a delicate thread looped between her fingers. It takes a moment, but you realize she's threading. Yes, threading the fine baby hairs to shape the perfect crescent above the brow. But this isn't just for eyebrows. She's extending the thread toward the scalp now, carving a clean, arched hairline as though tracing a god's signature. Turns out, Mughal courtiers didn't leave their hairlines to chance. High, curved, and precisely sculpted was in. It created what they called the moon-gate forehead, a smooth expanse believed to indicate nobility, intelligence, and spiritual clarity. You brush your own forehead instinctively. It feels, suddenly, uncomposed. The tools are simple: cotton thread, herbal paste, tiny brass razors honed to frightening sharpness. But the process? Painstaking. One slip, and your entire week is ruined. One girl fainted once, someone murmurs, but her parting was crooked anyway. The girl being worked on doesn't flinch. She's already in a trance, eyes half closed as jasmine oil is dabbed along her temples. A light breeze lifts a stray lock, and the old woman smooths it with her knuckle before lopping it clean off with a small blade. You watch it fall like a petal. There's discussion among scholars about whether these hairline rituals originated with Persian court customs or from older South Asian traditions. Some say they evolved from earlier Vedic ideals of symmetrical beauty. Others insist they were Mughal-specific, an aesthetic exported through court painters and copied by other nobles. Historians still argue whether the practice was reserved for high-ranking women or whether palace attendants partook as well. The artistic metaphor comes to life when a court sketcher arrives. He's tasked with documenting the final result. You expected charcoal. He brings watercolors. He adds the forehead arch with one fine stroke, murmuring that a well-groomed hairline is the sun's runway. Naturally, there's competition. It's said that Empress Nur Jahan once delayed an entire diplomatic audience because her hairline trim had gone asymmetrical. She would not be ruled by uneven geometry, one poet later wrote. Possibly exaggerating, but you believe it. Children, too, are inducted early. You see a toddler fussing while her nurse uses thread to gently define the tufts just above her ears. It's half discipline, half performance. And as each lock falls away, a sense of calm fills the courtyard, as though grooming was a form of purification. In a way, it was. The oils used post-threading are different, cooling astringent blends with vetiver, neem, and rose. The skin is soothed, polished, and sometimes dusted with pearl powder. You begin to understand why everyone here glows like they live inside a jewelry box. Later, you're ushered into a side room where a man is having his temples trimmed with surgical precision. Unlike the women's curved arcs, his hairline is squared, sharp, and edged with scented ash. It's part geometry, part intimidation. The barber even uses a tiny level, yes, a level, to make sure the line is balanced like a warrior's blade. You nod slowly. No pressure. He explains that Mughal generals believed their hairlines mirrored their fates. A crooked temple, misfortune, a widow's peak too sharp, doomed love, superstition, or strategy. Who can say? Even the spiritual advisors had thoughts. One bearded sage mutters about the gate of the soul and warns against shaving too high lest one's thoughts escape. You decide to take that one with a grain of rose salt. As twilight deepens, lamps are lit, and you're offered a mirror. Your own hairline has been lightly trimmed, cooled with rose balm, and, of course, dusted with something you can't quite name but that smells like moonlight. You look different. Not better, not worse, just composed, like a painting that's been properly framed. You leave the terrace feeling oddly uplifted. A breeze moves through the cloisters, catching a whisper between two courtiers, debating whether a certain noblewoman's new hairline looks thoughtful or scheming. You resist the urge to look back. As you return to your quarters, your reflection catches in a polished urn. For a split second, you recognize yourself not just as a visitor, but as someone who has been marked, however gently, by the court's sense of symmetry. And whether or not the sun really bows to your hairline now, it certainly feels like it might. You rise slowly the next morning, half floating through corridors still scented with rosewater and warm turmeric. Your scalp is soft, your forehead freshly defined, and now your curiosity tugs you deeper into the chambers where style meets ceremony. Today you're tracing the arc of the braid. Yes, braids. Not just any braid, but the singular Mughal choti, the central hair braid that was not just a hairstyle, but a hierarchy, a horoscope, and sometimes a veiled threat. You find yourself in a dressing alcove framed with mirror tiles. Inside, young attendants sit cross-legged before towering baskets of adornments. Ribbons dyed with crushed beetle wings, miniature bells, swatches of silk, and even scented threads laced with powdered amber. But at the center of it all is the braid, a cascade of black silk, sometimes real, sometimes extended, often thickened with human or horsehair. All Mughal court women wore it, but no two wore it the same. An older woman beckons you with the gentleness of a librarian. "Come," she murmurs, "and see how a braid becomes a biography." You settle onto a cushion while she demonstrates, starting with a single tight plait drawn low from the nape, bound in a thread so fine it resembles spider silk. But then it expands. Loops appear. Additional strands are woven in from ornamental side locks. She ties a golden clasp at the base, then layers ribbon through each coil like embroidery. The result is hypnotic. It glints with copper beads and tiny orange blossoms. And the scent? Vetiver and coconut oil, with a hint of clove tucked into a knot for temperance. Every knot has a reason, apparently. Some are tied clockwise for sweetness, others anti-clockwise to prevent deception. You wonder briefly what direction your own knots have gone. Historians still argue whether the Mughal braid's symbolism evolved from Rajput influences or was a purely Timurid invention carried from Central Asia. Some claim it began as a martial tradition, braids used to tie knives and lockets of protective scripture. Others trace its lineage through Persian poetry, where a beloved's braid was likened to the curve of a hunting bow. One fringe account, delightfully unproven, says the longer the braid, the more lies a woman was believed capable of telling. A gentle joke, perhaps, but the court took braids seriously. Some were so long they trailed behind their owners like velvet sashes, requiring assistance to keep them from catching under door frames, or, more awkwardly, on low-hanging lanterns. Layla appears beside you again, her own braid so neatly wound it looks carved. She explains how braids were also seasonal. In monsoon months, they were wrapped in silk to prevent mildew. In dry seasons, they were woven looser to allow oils to breathe. Some women added bells, not for vanity, but to keep birds from landing on them during outdoor feasts. Yes, that was a thing. And while court painters made everyone look eternally immaculate, you're told of the quiet panic that would descend if a braid unraveled in public. One poor attendant reportedly fled a wedding after her hair tie snapped during a curtsy. It was like a meteor shower, one poet wrote, but with pins. It wasn't only women. Mughal men too had their own versions. While most wore turbans, some younger nobles styled side locks into thin braids tied with amulets. A passing courtier named Ramat insists his braid contains a whisper from his grandmother, sealed in a knot. You're not sure if that's metaphor or magic, but you pretend to believe him anyway. And children? Oh, the baby braids. You spot toddlers with tiny top knots sprouting like palm trees. Layla tells you that some families braided a newborn's hair into a single strand on the seventh night as protection from evil spirits. The knot was then whispered to by a family elder, who might bless it with something as practical as sturdy teeth, or as poetic as a life untroubled by distant winds. The braid, you see, wasn't just a style, it was storage. Hidden inside might be bits of clove, messages, even coins. One empress allegedly braided a tiny golden spoon into her hair to avoid suspicious food-tasting incidents. You resist the urge to pat your own braid for utensils. And of course, there were taboos. Sleeping with a freshly braided head was said to invite chaotic dreams. Unbraiding after sunset, inviting misfortune, letting someone else braid your hair without consent. That counted as binding a promise. One woman famously refused to marry her suitor on the grounds that he'd touched her braid while she was sleeping. She married his cousin instead. Bold move. A soft drumbeat sounds from deeper within the palace. It's time for the afternoon viewing. The empress is set to unveil a new hair ornament, and you're told it will be showcased, yes, on a braid. You walk in a daze to the viewing garden, where incense trails through the air like curling script. The empress arrives, her braid looped in a coil shaped like a rose blossom. Within it, woven so tightly it seems like part of her, is a new pin, a crescent moon carved from lapis lazuli, rimmed in seed pearls. It's not just fashion, it's politics, art, even flirtation. You lean toward Layla. What does it mean? You whisper. She shrugs. Depends who's watching. And just like that, the braid is more than hair. It's a message. You leave the garden with the slow, swaying walk of someone whose head now carries weight. Not just oil and ornament, but centuries of braided intent. You wake the next morning with your braid slightly crooked, one jasmine petal crushed somewhere near your shoulder. Someone hums nearby, a lullaby about nightingales and mirrors, and you remember where you are. A world where hair is not just an accessory, but a vocabulary. Today, the room smells faintly of burnt sugar and sandalwood. Layla greets you with a sleepy grin and gestures toward a thick curtain. Today, she whispers, you'll learn about royal scenting rituals, but not for the body, for the hair. You're led into a chamber bathed in gold light, where the walls are lined with copper vessels, some small enough to fit in the palm of your hand. Steam rises gently from bowls of heated oil, while a girl with lavender-dyed fingertips stirs something that looks like marmalade. You soon learn it's a paste made from smoked clove, honey, myrrh, and powdered saffron, used to scent the base of the scalp before formal appearances. Because in the Mughal court it wasn't enough to look good, you had to smell like poetry too. The women here talk about galib, the art of lingering fragrance. A perfect court entrance involved movement, silk, and a trail of aroma timed to unfurl behind you like a veil of suggestion. Hair was the main vector. Tresses, braids, curls, each became a diffuser of expensive whispers. A girl leans over to show you the tiny clay burner she carries. It's shaped like a turtle, of all things, and inside it, hot coals burn beneath a disk of fragrant resin. She lifts her braid and holds it over the smoke, letting it absorb the aroma. You do the same and immediately catch the warm, resinous blend of oud and crushed petals. It's like wearing a secret garden on your scalp. Historians still debate whether hair fumigation came from Arabic traditions of bukur or evolved independently from Central Asian rituals brought by Babur's ancestors. Some argue it was medicinal, a way to treat lice or headaches. Others claim it was purely sensual, designed to entrance. One theory even claims that perfumed hair could disguise the subtle smoke of secret letters burned in haste, delightfully conspiratorial. The Empress Noor Jahan, as usual, comes up in the gossip. She was rumored to scent her hair with a rose-amber blend, known only to her inner circle. The recipe? Lost. Probably. Some say it involved sandalwood aged in moonlight. Others claim it required a single drop of rainwater from a mango leaf. You want to believe both. Later, you're given your own burner. It's in the shape of a fish, symbolic of luck, you're told, and a girl named Mina helps you load it with a blend called Scheherazade Night. It includes tobacco flower, dried citrus peel, and vetiver root soaked in date syrup. You hold your braid over the curling smoke and feel the warmth roll upward into your scalp. It's like being gently toasted. And it wasn't just women who scented their hair. Men, too, especially poets and musicians, participated in these rituals. One elderly singer insists his creative muse lives in the oils he rubs into his sideburns. No scent, he tells you, no sonnet. Fair enough. You pass a table of apothecaries carefully grinding ingredients with moonstone pestles. Some are making hair lacquers, sweet-smelling pastes applied to help curls hold. Others stir cooling oils meant to prevent scalp heat, a condition apparently blamed for everything from bad moods to missed appointments. Cool scalp, cool temper, one woman says sagely, rubbing mint oil into her parting. Of course, the elite had their preferences. The Emperor Jahangir supposedly banned camphor oils at court because they reminded him of sick rooms. A minor prince was exiled briefly for using patchouli too liberally, and one famously lovelorn courtier allegedly mixed a drop of his betrothed's perfume into his own hair oil every morning until he was caught. By her husband. Not all scents were subtle. During weddings, the air would thicken with floral oils until it felt drinkable. Courtiers might scent their hair with rose, jasmine, even burning sugarcane resin. There's even record of a concubine who used fried sesame oil laced with cinnamon bark, which sounds oddly delicious and mildly alarming. There's one jar in particular, a glass container tinted blue, that Layla opens carefully. Inside is a thick cream that smells like rain on hot stone. She dabs it into your roots and explains that it's called Meg Miti, cloud and earth. It's made from soil gathered just before the monsoon and soaked in sandalwood milk. You pause, stunned. You're literally wearing weather. The philosophy behind all this was subtle. The scent had to align with mood, season, even cosmic rhythms. Fragrant hair was an offering, to yourself, to others, even to the divine. One sage is quoted saying, "A scented braid is a prayer that walks." As you leave the room, your hair trailing smoke and sweetness, the corridor feels warmer, more golden. Attendants pass by and subtly lean in, curious about your new blend. One nods appreciatively. Another says you smell like a poem waking up. You don't know what that means, but you decide it's a compliment. The sun is higher today, lazily draping its golden fingers through the fretwork of carved marble windows. You stretch, slowly, as the perfumed memory of yesterday's hair rituals clings softly to your pillow. But something's shifted in the air. It's no longer just about decoration. Layla returns, her mood quieter, almost reverent. "You've seen how they adorn," she says, parting a curtain of velvet embroidered with stars. "Now, come see how they mourn." You follow her into a smaller chamber, Gone are the baskets of ribbons and bells. Instead, shelves display white muslin, iron combs, and pale sandalwood beads. This is the morning salon, where hair told stories not of love or status, but of sorrow, devotion, and remembrance. Here, silence is a kind of music. In Mughal court life, hair customs extended well into the spiritual realm. Mourning wasn't just about wearing white or reciting poetry. It affected every strand on your head. When someone died, especially within noble families, the women of the household would often unbraid their hair entirely. Some left it loose and wild, others trimmed a section, and in rare cases, especially for a deeply beloved figure, a woman might shave part of her head in mourning. Historians still argue whether these semi-shaving rituals were borrowed from Hindu widow traditions or adapted from Central Asian Turkic customs, where warriors would cut a lock in grief. Either way, the act was solemn. You feel the weight of it as Layla lifts a lock of her own hair and gently winds it around her finger. Just once. One quiet story survives of a concubine who, upon hearing of her lover's death in battle, tied her hair into a single tight bun and vowed never to undo it again. She lived 22 more years, and her hair was never unbound. There were other mourning hairstyles, too. Some involved drawing ash across the parting. Others required you to stop oiling your hair for 40 days, letting it frizz and mat as an outward sign of internal turbulence. The court poets noticed. One wrote, "Her curls once perfumed the dawn. Now they sleep in dust and silence." You take a seat beside a small table where a comb rests, old, worn, ivory. A girl named Rukhsar explains that after someone died, it was traditional to clean their favorite comb and place it among their personal relics. Hair, she reminds you, was the one part of the body that kept growing even after death. So, in a way, it outlived you. Mughal nobles sometimes had their braids preserved in scented cloths, kept inside sandalwood boxes lined with rose petals. Not to wear, not to display, just to remember. One empress, grieving her daughter, kept a ribbon-tied braid on her pillow for years, oiling it as if it still breathed, and sometimes hair was given, as a gift of grief. After a loss, sisters might exchange locks, carefully wrapped in verses of poetry. Some would seal it inside rings or miniature boxes. Others stitched it into shawl hems or prayer rugs. You're shown a faded green scrap embroidered with a single curl. Rukhsar doesn't say who it belonged to. She doesn't have to. The rules of mourning affected men too, though in subtler ways. A court musician once cut off his side curls in protest after the execution of his patron. He was arrested, not for disobedience, but for public display of dishevelment unbecoming to the imperial mood. Ah, bureaucracy. And there was nuance. Mourning hairstyles depended not just on the death, but the relationship, the season, even your astrological sign. Some star charts advised against cutting hair during certain lunar alignments following a death, believing it could scatter the soul's memory. One belief claimed that unbraiding your hair too soon after a burial could call the ghost home. Of course, not all mourned publicly. Some women styled their grief quietly, a single white thread braided into the hair, a knot tied tighter than usual, a fragrant oil switched for plain water. Layla tells you that sometimes a woman would comb her hair just once, at dawn, as a silent ritual of endurance. The rest of the day her hair would remain untouched. You find a mirror tucked in the corner, simple and unadorned. Your own reflection stares back, your braid slightly undone from sleep. For a moment you imagine tying it tighter, not for fashion but for memory, not for show but for stillness. Hair was not always celebratory here. Sometimes it was the only language grief could speak. And even in mourning, beauty persisted, not as glamour, but as care. The care to cleanse, to comb, to tie, to tend. The care to carry someone's memory strand by strand. You feel it now, like a hush beneath the usual bustle of the palace. This unspoken reverence for the past, woven quietly into each head. Then, as if not to let you sit too long in stillness, Layla brushes your shoulder and whispers, "Enough sadness. There's something brighter waiting." You rise slowly, braid heavy on your back, and step into a corridor where the air is beginning to smell of spices again. The quiet doesn't last. As you step into the next corridor, the hushed air of morning gives way to low laughter, a clatter of bangles, and the clink of metal combs tapping ivory boxes. Layla gives you a knowing look and gestures toward an archway draped with marigold strings. "Today," she says, "you'll meet the jesters of the hair world." You blink. Jesters? And then you hear it. A loud cackle followed by the unmistakable squelch of something being mashed. Inside, the room bursts with color. Saffron, crimson, turquoise, emerald, dyes everywhere. Bowls of them, platters holding pastes, powders, and petals. This is the chamber of playful hairstyles. The Mughal world had its solemnity, yes, but it also had mischief. And nowhere did that mischief play out more vividly than in the realm of humorous, festive, or downright theatrical hairstyles. A woman with bright green streaks through her hair is squeezing what looks like a pomegranate into someone else's parting. Someone else is coating their braid in crushed turmeric and indigo. You've stumbled into a preparatory salon for Basant Panchami, the spring festival, and the hairstyles here are less about elegance, more about audacity. You're quickly seated on a cushioned stool, and a girl named Pari hands you a mirror made of polished bronze. "For today," she grins, "you need peacock flair." Before you can ask what that means, she's already sectioning your hair with a wide-toothed comb dipped in rose water. The Mughal court didn't shy away from theatricality. Celebrations like Holi, Nowruz, and royal birthdays saw hairstyles take wild turns. Colored streaks, flower-festooned buns, henna-tipped fringes, every look pushed the boundaries of beauty toward playful art. One source even references a noblewoman who wove saffron-dyed silk threads into her braid and tucked firecracker-shaped charms at the ends. Literal hair fireworks. Historians still argue whether these bold hair experiments were reserved for entertainers and dancers, or if noblewomen indulged privately. Some believe these styles began in the zenanas as games among the attendants, and only later migrated into formal settings. Others suggest it was the dancers who influenced the court, not the other way around. Pari explains as she works, now braiding thin jasmine chains into your hair. "There was one concubine," she says with a wink, "who dyed her lover's name into her hair with crushed beetroot. 1 letter per curl." You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. "It's not confirmed, but seems like something she'd do." There's an entire section of the room devoted to novelty hair accessories, tiny mirrors, miniature mangoes carved from ivory, bells the size of your fingernail. A few women model their favorite styles. One has arranged her bun to resemble a blooming lotus, petals curling upward, held together with sugar water and stealthy pins. Another has a topknot shaped like a crescent moon, painted with gold dust and framed with peacock feathers. And then there's the joke styles. Oh yes, even the Mughal elite enjoyed a prank now and then. One popular jest involved secretly styling someone's hair while they napped, a common occurrence in the warmer afternoons. A favorite target? New brides. The trick was to coil their braid into a spiral and insert a tiny clay lizard ornament. Mildly alarming to wake up to, but harmless fun. Usually, you're shown a court sketch from a forgotten album. It depicts a eunuch with exaggerated hair spirals towering like pastry twists, used during a comic performance at a spring court assembly. Apparently, He reenacted the story of a woman whose hair grew so long it turned into rope and was used to win a tug-of-war contest. Parody hairstyles, Pari whispers, were considered clever entertainment. You giggle as she paints your parting with a pale orange pigment made from dried marigolds and sesame oil. The smell is nutty, grounding. She finishes the look by tying a thread of pink silk around your braid and adding a single crimson rose behind your ear. You glance at your reflection. Playful, vivid, vaguely floral. You look like the mascot of springtime rebellion. Even the men got in on the fun. Young princes sometimes challenged each other to design the most elaborate festival coiffure. There's one record of a nobleman who arranged his beard into a spiral and tucked miniature cherry blossoms into it. Another infamous example tells of a courtier who braided his mustache ends and attached tiny bells. He was promptly asked to sit outside. Still, there was art in the chaos, a balance. This wasn't crude dressing up. It was ritual joy, a reminder that hair, like mood, like weather, could be lighthearted, unpredictable, even ridiculous. And that was fine. Encouraged even. Some of the women around you now are preparing for a nighttime dance. Their hair has been coiled into high, intricate loops inspired by Persian geometry. A nod to their heritage, yes, but also a playful challenge to gravity. Dance-proof hair, they joke. The more you look, the more you realize these styles weren't just frivolous. They were codes. One braid looped over the crown meant you were available to flirt. 2 loops, already taken. 3, no one's business but yours. A streak of green might signal a secret admirer. A streak of yellow? You were the secret admirer. Communication via coiffure. Pari leans in one last time, tightening your final braid. When you walk out, she says, tilt your head to the left. The rose will catch the light better. And so you do. You walk the marble corridor with marigold-scented braids, and the light catches the petals just so. A nearby musician lifts an eyebrow in surprise. 2 handmaids giggle. You feel ridiculous and radiant all at once. Hair, it seems, was not always about elegance. Sometimes it was about laughter, and the freedom to not take beauty so seriously. By now, the rhythm of the palace has become familiar. The way laughter echoes through latticework, the smell of perfumed oil clinging to the stair railings, the polite tug of an attendant's glance when it's time to move on. Today, you follow Layla into a cooler, quieter space, its walls lined with shadowy frescoes and shelves stacked with rolls of cloth. This, she murmurs, is where the hair meets the head wrap. Welcome to the Turban Studio, or more precisely, the secret life of Mughal head coverings and what lies beneath or within them. You'd be forgiven for assuming turbans were just fashion statements or marks of social status. In the Mughal era, however, they were as much about hair management as they were about authority. Beneath those elegantly wrapped coils, a world of tricks, textures, and not-so-casual padding. Turbans didn't just cover hairstyles, they shaped them. You're invited to sit, and a soft-spoken man named Hafiz offers you a tightly rolled bundle of white muslin. Try, he says. You place it on your head, but without the practiced hands and patient twisting, it quickly flops sideways like a defeated pastry. Hafiz chuckles and begins to wrap it for you, each fold slow and deliberate. As he works, he tells you about the art of turban layering. Some nobles, especially in the imperial court, padded their turbans with cloth inserts that created artificial height, an effect known as the Taj style. Sometimes this elevation had symbolic meaning. Other times it was just vanity. Historians still argue whether certain exaggerated turban forms were born from Central Asian battlefield helmets or evolved purely as aesthetic flourishes in the Mughal zenana. Either way, the result was the same, towering confidence. But what about the hair underneath? Hafiz carefully removes one half-wrapped turban from a mannequin and reveals a meticulously oiled top knot, perfectly centered. "The knot must sit like a plum," he says, tapping it gently. This knot wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. Many believed the placement of the hair on the crown influenced mood, focus, even connection to the divine. Like acupuncture, but without the needles. You learn that during court ceremonies, men and women alike sometimes tied their hair in precise geometric spirals, pressed with rosewater and wrapped beneath the turban so that, should it accidentally shift or slip, the revealed hair would look intentional, styled, composed, unmarred by frizz or sweat. There's a little scandal, too. One document suggests that a prince once placed a perfumed love letter inside the folds of his turban, tucked under a layer of hair and cloth. When he bowed to his beloved, the note fell, dramatically, perfectly, into her lap. Planned, probably, smooth, absolutely. Some women created secret compartments in their head wraps, stashing notes, charms, or even tiny vials of attar inside. One tale tells of a dancer who hid a lock of her late sister's hair inside the innermost coil of her ceremonial headscarf and wore it every day until her death. No one knew, not even her patrons. And then there were practical reasons. Turbans helped protect elaborate hairstyles from dust or unexpected gusts of wind. They also allowed wearers to conceal more eccentric styles until the dramatic reveal. Imagine removing your turban at a private gathering to show off a fresh lattice braid dyed gold. It's not just undressing, it's theater. Hafiz shares that royal women sometimes wore lighter head wraps indoors, made of semi-transparent silk, so their carefully parted center lines remained just visible. There was something flirtatious in it. "I'm veiled," it whispered, "but not that veiled." You try on another style, a layered wrap dyed with tea and edged with maroon thread. The sensation is surprisingly calming, like a weighted blanket, but for your thoughts. "Now move your head slightly," Hafiz says. You do, and the folds shift gently. He nods. That's what you want, a turban that moves with the hair, not against it. He explains that the most skilled hairdressers worked closely with turban artists. Together, they choreographed how the bun, or knot, would interact with the wrap. One style even required you to braid the hair into a coil that served as the anchor for the turban, reducing the need for pins. Practical, sure, but it also created a hidden symmetry. There were taboos, of course. Removing someone's turban without permission was a massive insult, almost worse than pulling hair directly. It wasn't just about dignity, it disrupted the entire structure they had built, both physical and symbolic. And age mattered. Young boys typically wore simple wraps over loosely combed hair, but upon reaching a certain age, usually marked by a rite of passage ceremony, they received their first formal turban wrapping lesson and a private hair braiding ritual from an elder. One prince's diary notes, "Today, mother braided my hair with clove oil, and I wore the green for the first time. I felt taller, though I knew I was not." As for servants and guards, their head wraps were functional, but even they had their rules. One guard tells you he always styles his hair into tight plaits before his shift. "Keeps the helmet from slipping," he says, then winks. "And it looks good when I take it off in the kitchens." You leave the room slightly more regal than when you entered. Not because of the turban, though it does give you a certain height, but because you now understand what lies beneath it. The careful twist of knot and cloth, the dance between concealment and revelation. In a world where every strand told a story, even the things designed to cover hair were complicit in its tale. You're growing used to the rhythm now, the steady hush of slippers on marble, the warm scent of jasmine trailing through air, thick with age and memory. But as you round the next corner with Layla, the stillness shifts. Not heavier exactly, more reverent. You've entered the threshold of the twilight years. This, she says softly, is the chamber of silver strands. It's not metaphorical. Before you lies a room unlike the others. Fewer mirrors, no chatter, no bells or garlands. Just quiet low seats, a shelf of folded shawls, and several women with hair like river light, soft, long, gray-white, coiled into serene shapes. The Mughal court may have been obsessed with youth and ornament, but aging was not an afterthought. It was its own chapter, complete with its own hairstyles, ones that spoke of wisdom, grace, and sometimes quiet rebellion. One of the older women waves you over with fingers still nimble from decades of braiding. Her name is Rani, and she's been the keeper of aging hair rituals for nearly 40 years. You sit, and she begins to part your hair with a comb that smells faintly of cedar. No fuss, no frills. In youth they painted, she says, sectioning with patience. In old age, they listened. Mainstream history often glosses over this. What happened to Mughal women once the rose petals faded from their cheeks and the jewels grew heavier than joy. But here you see the continuation. These women may no longer have woven pearls into their hair or arranged rosewater curls for seduction, but their hairstyles still mattered. Many Mughal women in their later years opted for center-parted buns coiled low and tight at the nape of the neck, scented with sandalwood and camphor. This wasn't laziness, it was a kind of signature. The nape bun spoke of restraint, of having seen too much to care for peacock feathers anymore. Some preferred thick, orderly braids tucked under muslin scarves. Others embraced the gray, powdering it with flour or rice dust to add texture and keep it fresh-smelling in the heat. One court journal even records a widowed noblewoman who, after her husband's death, wore her hair completely unstyled for a full year, just combed straight back and tied with plain string. Her quiet grief was loud enough. Historians still debate whether elderly Mughal women truly relinquished elaborate hair rituals or simply transformed them into more private acts. Some suggest their styles became secretive, shared only among peers behind closed jolly windows. Others argue they maintained silent competitions of elegance, like whose braid was thickest or who could scent her scalp with the most subtle attar. Rani pulls your hair into a gentle coil and begins massaging warm almond oil into your scalp. We stop dyeing at 60, she says, unless the dye smells good. Then we make exceptions. Yes, even the aged played with color, not garish ones, but herbal washes, indigo, walnut husk, tea leaves that subtly deepen the silver into smoky charcoal. You might not even notice the tint unless the sunlight hit just so. You're shown a narrow box filled with silver hairpins, not decorative, just precise. Long, unbending, shaped like delicate fish bones. Some of these women crafted their own pins from sandalwood twigs, sharpening them against stone while reciting verses. Hair tools as meditation. Imagine that. There's an almost monastic calm to it all. In youth, hair was a social language. In old age, it became internal. Less about impressing others, more about organizing the self. And yet, vanity didn't disappear. One elder sitting nearby shows you her secret stash, dried petals from an extinct orchid, crushed into a fine powder, mixed with rice starch, and dusted into the scalp every morning. Not for beauty, she insists, for memory. The smell reminds me of when I met the emperor. Still, there were acts of resistance. One grandmother famously refused the traditional low bun and continued to wear a high knot wrapped in crimson ribbon well into her 70s. The court poet called her the banyan tree, Rani grins. Tall, fragrant, impossible to ignore. Some older women began sleeping with their hair loose again, a quiet luxury they had denied themselves in their younger, more disciplined years. Imagine it. Silver strands spilling over cotton pillows scented with cardamom, untamed by braids or buns. A soft rebellion. There's even an obscure record from a Portuguese merchant who noted a group of elderly Mughal women performing twilight prayers with hair unbound, singing songs from their youth. It was like watching the moon sing, he wrote, awed and slightly unnerved. Ronnie finishes with a final twist, pinning your bun with a cool brass clip shaped like a lotus seed pod. For patience, she explains. You reach up to feel it. It holds steady, solid, but not severe. As you leave the room, you pass a shelf lined with hand mirrors face down. We don't always need to look, one woman chuckles behind you. We know what we are. There's a dignity to that, a kind of gentle audacity. Here, in the later seasons of life, hair doesn't fade into irrelevance. It changes key, becomes subtler, slower, but no less a song. The palace seems quieter after this visit, as if the walls themselves are pausing, bowing slightly to the women who wore their silver-like silk and refused to vanish with the fashion of youth. You've seen the styles of youth and age, the polished elegance of courtly ritual, and the meditative quiet of silver-haired matriarchs. But now, Layla brings you somewhere noisier. Not in volume, but in texture. Smells, clinks, fabric swishes. It's alive in here. You're in the wing of the itinerants, the in-betweens, the backstage magicians, palace hairdressers, stylists, the unsung hands behind every polished head and perfumed braid. You might expect uniformity here, strict codes, approved styles, but instead you find experimentation, whispers of the new, and plenty of audacity. Welcome, says a woman with saffron-dyed fingertips, to where the rules are bent. She calls herself Sitara, though you're pretty sure that's not her real name. Her braid is wrapped in crimson gauze and ends in a tassel of bronze beads. She's brushing out the tangled locks of a hand-carved wooden mannequin while simultaneously holding a brazier with a little puff of smoke. Clove and neem, she explains, keeps the lice and the court gossip away. Sitara and her cohort are the hair artisans for visiting nobles, dancers, lower-ranking courtiers, and the occasional daring lady-in-waiting who wants to make a quiet scene. And these women? They push boundaries, sometimes literally, by plucking, trimming, or even reshaping the natural hairline to better match a new style, a rising trend in the mid-17th century. The scalloped fringe. A fake fringe, actually, made of woven horsehair and pinned gently onto the forehead with tiny brass hooks. Extremely controversial, extremely chic. Historians still argue whether these fringe extensions originated in Persia or were inspired by ancient Hindu bridal styles. Either way, Sitara doesn't care. We just care if it turns heads, she winks. The biggest secret you're let in on today? Fake hair. Oh yes, bundles of hair, carefully washed, dyed, perfumed, and stored in lacquered boxes. They call them chutkis, meaning snippets. And they're the not-so-secret weapons of the Mughal glam squad. Sometimes they're added to bulk out a braid. Other times they're twisted into elaborate crowns atop natural hair to give the illusion of impossible volume. You even see some that are made not of human hair, but goat wool, brushed smooth and tinted with crushed indigo. These are used for theatrical hairstyles, often worn by palace performers or the emperor's favorite musicians. Apparently, it's very hard to keep your bun intact when playing the sitar for 3 hours straight. In one corner, a younger apprentice is threading tiny beads into a miniature braid, no thicker than a matchstick. For the heel dancers, she murmurs. When they flip their hair, the beads make the sound of bells. It's not just beautiful, it's practical choreography. And then, a bit of gossip. You learn that during Shah Jahan's reign, one favored concubine wore an ever-changing hairstyle composed of detachable braid sections, each scented differently: rose, clove, saffron, musk. Depending on her mood, she'd signal intent through scent. One day, Sitara says dramatically, She wore no scent. The emperor cancelled court. You can't tell if the story's true, but it's too good not to believe. The hairstylists here are also chemists. You're shown bowls of crushed herbs and flower petals mixed with oils and waxes to create natural styling balms. 1. A sticky paste of fig sap and sandalwood is used to stiffen spiraled coils into place for full-day ceremonies. Another, made from poppy seed oil and crushed basil, makes the hair shine like still water at dusk, according to one very poetic note in the corner. But it's not all glamour. You're told of mishaps, an overly ambitious updo collapsing mid-procession, or worse, a dancer whose bead braid caught fire from a stray oil lamp. Sitara shows you the panic comb, a flat ironwood tool used to rapidly dismantle complex styles if things go south. You learn to comb and run, she says. Despite the flair, everything here is still rooted in knowledge. Apprentices study hair anatomy, scalp health, even pulse points. Some stylists work closely with palace physicians to ensure their clients' hair rituals support their humoral balance. Too much oil and your temperament grows sluggish, one tells you. Too little and you become sharp-tongued. There's even talk of astrological styling. One particular style, worn during eclipses, involves 3 plaits braided into a single twist that curls clockwise around the crown. Meant to trap chaos, according to Sitara, though she rolls her eyes while saying it. Still, the design is stunning. And sometimes, just sometimes, styling crosses into ritual. One story tells of a dancer who refused to undo her ceremonial hairstyle for 7 days after a lunar celebration. She slept upright, head supported by cushions, hair lacquered stiff and wrapped in silk to preserve the divine arrangement. She had neck cramps for a week, Sitara adds, but the gods were pleased. In one chest you find small scraps of poetry written by hairdressers, tucked between strands of leftover braid extensions. One reads, "I parted her hair and found a story hidden behind the left ear." You stay longer than you mean to. The room is chaotic and calm all at once. Everyone talks while working, fingers always in motion, combing, twisting, threading, dreaming. It feels like being inside the mind of the court itself. Vivid, layered, a little rebellious, endlessly styled. And as you rise to go, Sitara hands you a thin, fragrant cord of twisted marigold hair. Not human, not real, but beautiful. "For your dream tonight," she says. "Make it a glamorous one." The corridors have quieted again. After the rustling bustle of Sitara's realm, the hush feels almost like snowfall, soft and blanketing. Layla doesn't say much now. She just nods toward a narrower hall you hadn't noticed before, tucked behind a curtain embroidered with sleeping peacocks. "This part," she murmurs, "is for stories we don't always tell." And just like that, you step into the world of hair and politics. At first glance, the women here don't look particularly rebellious. They sit in 2s or 3s, heads tilted toward each other, braiding slowly, sharing sweets. But if you listen closely, you start to hear something underneath. A coded language. In Mughal courts, hair wasn't just vanity. It was statement, alignment, power, defiance sometimes. And every twist or part could whisper something that the tongue dared not say. Take, for instance, the center-parted braid with the single thread of red silk. It looks like decoration. It wasn't. It signaled alignment with a particular political faction in court, a discreet way of broadcasting which noble family you supported without ever saying their name. Historians still argue whether this was a formalized code or simply an open secret among palace insiders. Either way, the message was heard. Then there was the lotus knot, a complicated style woven to resemble the open petals of a lotus at the back of the head. Elegant, yes, but also known to be favored by women loyal to Nur Jahan's political faction during the height of her influence. Wearing the knot was less about beauty and more about belonging. You sit near an older woman named Humra, who's threading gold wire into her braid with surprising dexterity. She chuckles softly. "When the men made policy," she says, "we made parts." Her hair is thick and graying now, but she tells you stories of her youth when rival wives of courtiers competed through style, not louder but subtler. One noblewoman famously wore an inverted braid, coiled beneath instead of over her shawl, to signify her opposition to her husband's political maneuverings. He never noticed. Every other woman did. Hair as diplomacy, or perhaps hair as sabotage. Another style, seemingly simple, 2 braids wrapped into a crown and pinned just slightly off-center, was rumored to indicate that the wearer had been passed over for a courtly promotion or a promised favor. Not angry, just pointed. Imagine walking through the garden, spotting 3 ladies wearing that exact tilt, and realizing someone had broken a promise. Of course, the emperor's consorts were under scrutiny as well. A favored queen might adopt a new style, and by morning, half the harem would echo it. Not necessarily out of admiration, but out of calculation. Safety. Hair became a kind of allegiance, a shield against being seen as disloyal. And not all rebellions were loud. One tale goes that a lady-in-waiting, accused unjustly of gossip, wore her hair unbound for a full day. A shocking display. Not out of sensuality, but out of protest. Unbound hair was, after all, associated with mourning or madness. But in her case, it was her testimony. She let the palace draw its own conclusions. Charges dropped. She returned to braids the next day. Silent justice. You also hear of moments where style intersected with espionage. Yes, spycraft. One enterprising woman allegedly braided a micro-scroll into her hair, tight and sealed in beeswax, to deliver messages between noble houses. Whether this is folklore or fact, no one's quite sure. But Layla whispers, "It worked at least once. That's all you need." Another story lingers around the night oil, a particular fragrant mixture only worn by certain courtiers when visiting their allies after dark. One whiff on your pillow and you knew who had visited, and perhaps who they were plotting with. And then there are the subtle exclusions. During a period of courtly tension, certain women stopped wearing floral hairpins. Not because they disliked them, but because the reigning empress loved them. A quiet mutiny of the bun. Humra finishes her braid and offers to weave a single feathered thread through yours. Not for politics, she says, but for memory. She smiles, but it's the kind of smile that knows where all the bodies are buried, and exactly what they were wearing when they went. You're left wondering how many historical decisions, treaties, exiles, strategic marriages, were influenced not in the formal durbar, but in the mirrored chambers of women adjusting their plaits, noting whose braid pointed where and what it meant. Because in the Mughal court, silence wasn't emptiness. It was detail. It was style. And hair, glossy, scented, or plain, spoke volumes if you knew how to listen. By now, you've walked past silk screens and ivory combs, through saffron-scented chambers and back rooms filled with heated debates over hairlines and herbal oils. But Layla's hand now rests lightly on your arm, and her voice is softer than ever. "We've seen ambition," she says. "Now let's see devotion." She leads you into a small, lantern-lit room lined with shelves of folded fabrics, devotional charms, and dried flowers. It smells of jasmine and sandalwood, soft, melancholic. This is where hair becomes prayer. Not display, not defiance, just quiet, private ritual. A sacred thread woven into the rhythms of life. You meet Mariam here, a gentle figure with henna-stained palms and hair tied simply in a low knot. She doesn't speak loudly or quickly. Everything about her is deliberate, slow, and serene. She tends to the hair of the women who come not for glamour but for solace. Grieving widows, newlyweds seeking blessings, mothers marking their children's birthdays with symbolic plaits. You sit near her and she shows you a particular tradition, the manat braid, a votive style. One long, continuous braid, knotted at intervals, each knot symbolizing a prayer or promise. Some are tight, meant to hold fast. Others are left deliberately loose, to let the heavens decide, as Mariam says with a faint smile. Once the prayer is fulfilled, the braid is carefully undone, always with rose water and a whispered word of thanks. Historians still argue whether this practice originated in the Mughal court or was inherited from pre-Islamic traditions in northern India. Either way, it's endured through centuries of shifting rule and fashion. Something about the tactility of hair, the way it can carry intention, memory, makes it perfect for sacred tasks. You learn that certain oils are reserved only for ritual use. Vetiver for protection, neem for purification, and a mixture of amla and tulsi leaves for long-term healing. Never used on days of court, Mariam adds. Only on days when the soul needs tending. There's also a tradition you didn't expect, the remembrance braid. When someone passes, a lock of their hair, if available, is sometimes braided into a small cord and kept wrapped in silk beside devotional objects. Not displayed, not worn, just kept, tucked away like a keepsake of presence. It's not about grief, Mariam explains. It's about remembering the shape of someone's absence. It's hard not to get a little misty at that one. She shows you her tools, not jewel-studded combs, but simple bone pins, soft brushes made of goat hair, a cloth soaked in moon water. And she hums while she works, low, rhythmic, almost inaudible. You find yourself swaying to it without meaning to. One woman nearby, a new bride by the look of her red scarf, sits patiently while Mariam plaits a bridal wish braid. 3 strands, each representing hope, loyalty, and joy. She tucks a clove bud into the final loop for protection and gently wraps the end with copper thread. The thread breaks, she says, but the prayer doesn't. Another woman arrives in silence, places a small bowl of sandal paste near the combs, and then sits with her head bowed. No words exchanged. Mariam simply begins undoing her braid, slowly, methodically. It's an unbraiding of grief, each loop unwound like a tension melting away. And not all is solemn. There's a little girl laughing while Mariam dots her parting with a mix of turmeric and jasmine to keep nightmares away. The child chatters about a dream where she rode an elephant to the moon. "Did your braid stay in place?" Mariam asks. The girl nods solemnly. "Then it was a good dream." You're shown a collection of small charms, sometimes tied into the hair during lunar festivals, tiny metal stars, slivers of dried ginger, seed pods shaped like little eyes. Protection from envy, Mariam explains, and bad poetry. She chuckles. You like her more with every passing moment. It becomes clear that in this quiet room, hairstyles aren't aesthetic decisions. They're emotional landscapes. You can trace someone's week, maybe even their heartache, by the way their braid sits. The parting might shift from left to center. The braid might tighten as anxiety grows. Loose strands might signal distraction or peace. Hair listens, Mariam says, brushing a fine-toothed comb across her own scalp. It knows before we do. She tells you of a tradition once observed among select courtiers. On the last night of the full moon, women would undo their hair completely, sit on rooftops, and let the night wind comb through it. It was said to renew clarity, to untangle confusion. You should try it, she smiles, even if all you do is catch a chill. At this point, you realize no oil, no comb, no pin has touched your own hair this entire time. Mariam notices too. She gently beckons you forward. Let me give you something for the road. She doesn't braid, twist, or ornament. She simply brushes your scalp once with her soft comb, smooths a whisper of oil at your temples, and ties your hair into the simplest loop, a knot of rest. There, she says, now your dreams have something to hold on to. By now, the palace feels familiar. You've roamed echoing halls of ambition, giggled through backstage gossip, listened to oils crackle in quiet kitchens, and learned more about braids than you thought a lifetime could hold. But there's still one chamber left. Layla gestures with just her eyes this time. No words needed. You follow her through a door that's smaller than the rest, low enough that you must duck your head. The wood is warm beneath your fingertips. The room opens up not into another salon or gallery, but something more like an archive. Not of documents, though, of dolls. Hundreds of small figures, all hand-carved and wrapped in cloth, sit in tidy rows on shallow wooden shelves. Their hair is the only thing meticulously rendered, miniature braids, knots, buns, and twists, preserved with astonishing care. Each one bears a name etched on a tag, a nickname, a year, a place. This, Layla whispers, is the hair library. It began as a pastime for a noblewoman during the waning days of Shah Jahan's reign, at least according to the surviving whispers. She reportedly had no political power, no grand salon, no palace drama. But what she did have was an obsessive love of hair design and a very talented hand with miniature figures. She carved a new doll for every style she invented or encountered, using silk thread, real human hair, and bits of horse mane. And each one was recorded, not for vanity but for memory. Historians still argue whether she was a historical figure at all or just court legend. But the hair library remains, passed from hand to hand like an heirloom memory palace. Most of the dolls are styled in looks you now recognize: the peacock coil, the inverted braid of protest, the post-bath spiral, the ceremonial knots. But some are completely unfamiliar, mysterious, like dialects no longer spoken. One, for example, shows a crown of hair woven with seed beads, placed asymmetrically above the ear. Another has a tight twist, the center dyed with turmeric, something not mentioned in any written court record. Perhaps these were private styles, or symbolic ones, or simply someone's favorite. You spot one that makes you pause, a style so simple, a loose braid, no ornament, but a thread of deep blue running through it. It's the dream braid, Layla murmurs, worn only the night before a pilgrimage, to hold wishes close while sleeping. Another doll has a half-bun, half-braid construction, tied with rose petals pressed flat. Wedding Eve, she says, when you don't know whether to feel bold or afraid. And here's the clever bit. Some of the dolls have hidden compartments in their wooden torsos. Open one and you might find a pin, a pressed flower, a note in Persian script, tiny symbols of the style's origin or meaning. The woman who made them was archiving not just appearance, but emotion, gesture, mood, like bottling the memory of an afternoon. You take your time walking the rows. The dolls, strange as it sounds, begin to feel like old acquaintances, each head a whisper, each plait a small echo. You begin to realize hairstyles are not just for presentation or ceremony. They are containers for memory, for feeling, for everything that could not be said aloud in a place of strict roles and silent rivalries. One doll stands apart, much older, carved roughly, hair tangled and unkempt. We call her the Forgotten One, Layla says softly. No record of her style, no name, just found among the rest, as though someone made her during a moment of sadness or fear. She runs a finger down the side of the tiny head. Even forgotten styles deserve to be remembered. You sit for a while in this quiet space, the dolls all watching, the room warmer than the others somehow. Not in temperature, but in spirit. This isn't about history anymore, not emperors or edicts. It's about women preserving one another, braid by braid, comb by comb. Long after names are lost, a hairstyle might remain, tucked inside a carved wooden doll, or whispered about during oiling rituals, or passed down from aunt to niece with nothing but the words, "This one is for protection. This one is for hope." Layla brings you one last figure, a new doll, freshly carved but blank. She places it in your hand with a gentle smile. "This one's for you," she says. "You choose the style." And maybe, just maybe, you will. And now the chamber's dim. The rustle of silks fades. The scent of jasmine drifts, thinner and softer now, as if the palace itself is beginning to dream. You sit quietly, feeling the weight of history, not as a burden, but like a shawl, worn gently around your shoulders, warm and forgiving. Outside, the sky has shifted into that liminal blue before dawn. Not quite night, not quite morning. A time when memories float easier and even long-forgotten whispers seem to rise with the wind. You think of Sitara's combs, Humra's silent justice, Mariam's moon-water brush, and the dolls. Oh, those silent watching dolls. They were never just figures, were they? They were tiny, wordless diaries, not meant to impress, but to remember. The room grows quieter still, and as you breathe out, you let your own thoughts braid themselves into gentler shapes. No more noise, no more pace, just smooth strands, flowing thoughts, untangled and eased. You are safe here, in this gentle space where even forgotten hairstyles are cradled like lullabies. Time doesn't rush in the palace of sleep. It loops, it curls, it rests. So close your eyes now. Let your breath slow. You've walked the halls of history. Now it's time to drift. Sweet dreams.